Hey guys, this video we're going to go over cleaning and inspecting all of the parts of a pump and motor assembly. We're going to mainly kind of talk about cleaning all the different parts such as the coupler, the shaft, and the motor, and we're going to get into some inspection of all these parts and kind of how it maybe matters in the long run. Okay. Main thing I want to point out before we get to like anything starts, we want to go ahead and visually look over this whole pump assembly. You'd be surprised how many times I've gone to work on something and it's really just been something just, stupid that's really gone wrong with it. Somebody's run into it with a forklift, maybe it's got cold or something happened maybe where the electrical got cut. Or it's visually obvious. Maybe you can see that the shaft is a little bit bent. Maybe you can see the coupler's worn out. That's a very typical thing you could see. So take the time, really look it over, because you're going to make yourself look really good for your boss. He's going to see that you've found it very quickly, as opposed to halfway through the job, you come to him and you're like, hey, this is messed up, and he's going to go, why didn't you see that earlier on? So just kind of cover yourself a little bit, take the time, look everything over, and as we go through this, you want to make sure that you look over each part very well. I mean, you want to really inspect each one of these. Now, you probably obviously noticed that I started tearing down that coupler because I couldn't shut up and kept talking. So I just went ahead and got on with the actual job here. I'm not going to go over how to tear down the coupler, how to take it all apart. That's stuff we go over in previous classes. So go ahead, get it off, get it apart, and let's start looking over it. So I went ahead and tore down this coupler. I know that we've done it a few times in the pump section or pump rebuild section, so I didn't think you guys needed me to show you how to do it again. But if you have any questions on it, please let me know and I'll go over anything you'd like to see. Now the main things, because now we want to inspect this one. Lucky for us, this is a pretty new coupler, and I'll show you why we replaced it right now. So we ended up replacing the coupler because the old one looked like this, and we're not even totally sure what happened. May have just been dropped or mishandled at some point, but this could create a major imbalance in that coupler. So we just went ahead and got rid of it, put a new one in. Another thing, so the other stuff I want to point out to mainly inspect is this is a flex style coupling. So flex style couplings typically have a rubber insert in the middle and then two jaw type flanges on either side to hold it in there. Now this rubber can become hardened over time. It can be it can get dirt inside here. It can get water. Sometimes water will freeze inside this inner coupling, and then it'll create a serious imbalance. But check this thing out. If it's looking really weathered, you might think about replacing it. If it's beginning to discolor, turn white, you might want to replace it. Sometimes it gets I'd call it almost a seam down the center, and that would indicate that you've been misaligned for a long time. It'll be this white seam where it's been constantly being worked sideways. So you might want to, at that point, think about replacing it. Another thing you want to look at is these keys. You might check them and make sure that they fit properly and they're fitting tight. They also are easy to get in and out. If there's a bunch of burrs in there, now's the time to file off either the keyway, these internal keyways in here, or the shafts on the actual pump and motor. So take the time now, save you a lot of time in the long run when you're going back together with it. Otherwise, what else I'd say to do is just clean it. Make sure when you're going back together, you don't have a bunch of dirt, say on this back face over here, because what will happen is this piece needs to mount back onto here. If it's on there crooked because of dirt, you're just going to have a world of problems. So make sure everything's super clean when you're going back together, and you should be good to go. Again, if you need to maybe at this point replace your lock washers or maybe your bolts, this is a good time to look at them and see what you need. Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue on with the shaft inspection part. One of the few tests that we do is called a bearing clearance test. And what you do is you take a pry bar and you place it on top of a block, or really just get yourself within the range that pry bar can add some pressure to that shaft. And then you put a dial indicator up on the shaft. and lightly apply some pressure. And as you can see, there should be only a few thousandths of an inch movement in that dial indicator. Once you do one side, then you're just going to go ahead and switch to the next side. You want to make sure you do both the pump and the motor. So I know you're expecting me to show you how to do the pump, but turns out my film got kind of messed up, and I think you guys are more than smart enough to figure out how to do the pump. Next, we're going to move on to checking the shafts for run out. What you're going to do is you're going to set up the dial indicator kind of like so, where the dial indicator is usually located on top. You're going to rotate the shaft around until you go to the other side, or till it's 360 degrees. You want to make sure that you don't drop it into the keyway. It just kind of throws you off a little bit. So just try to make sure it's perfectly straight up and down. All your dial indicator is nice and tight, and check both shafts for this. As you're rotating that shaft around, you're going to watch that dial and see how much run out it has. Usually you can set it up at 0, but it doesn't really matter. You're just really looking for a movement, okay? Next, I went ahead and I started removing the fan. I decided I wanted to lift the motor off here, and we're going to talk to you guys a little bit about that here in a second. But the eye bolt is broken off on this particular motor, and we didn't have a good way of lifting it. Now there's multiple ways you could lift it. I decided to go ahead and take a strap and go from one side of the one shaft to the other side. It seemed to work pretty well. It seemed to be pretty safe. There are some better options you can do, but I would highly recommend this one for this motor. So not everybody can remove the motor to inspect the pedestal, but if you have the opportunity, I would definitely take it and really kind of inspect that pedestal. Maybe if you don't have an overhead crane, you could use a pry bar, prop it up, get underneath it, and maybe block it up and look at it, okay? So most of the things we're looking for, dirt. You want to make sure you clean off any dirt. If there's any dirt between that motor and the pedestal, it could cause a soft foot problem, or it could actually ruin your shimming later on down the road, or cause things to come loose. Do want to explain what soft foot is. Soft foot is when the motor does not sit perfectly flat on that pedestal. So any impurities, any like odd shaped type stuff could do that. Next, I'm going to go over that surface, and I'm just kind of looking for any high or low spots. Again, we're just trying to inspect it, make sure it's all nice and flat. I'm mainly going over those bolt holes. What can happen is those bolts can get pulled on over time. Maybe they've been over tightened or something like that, and they could actually be pulled up, and they're what you'd call like the volcano bolt problem, I guess. And what it does is it creates a volcano, like in the picture here, and it causes the motor to be off balance, or maybe it creates a weird crush, or you're not going to be able to shim it up easily, okay? So definitely look for that. If that happens, you want to make sure you take the time, grind it off, okay? So on this particular pump alignment, we had some problems with the threads on the motor here. So what we did was just run a tap through to clean them all up really nicely. If you did have, per se, that volcano bolt problem, or just some bolt problems that were maybe hard to get out, things like that, it'd be a good idea to run a tap through them here. It's really easy to get at them. It just takes a couple minutes to run the tap quickly through them. Just want to make sure lots of oil. That way you don't break that tap off inside on accident. And be careful, because these will be blind holes more than likely, and you don't want to hit the bottom and break that tap. Definitely want to reiterate, you want to make sure that pedestal is perfectly clean. Like I said, if you put the motor back on top and you tighten it down, get it all aligned perfectly, and there's dirt in between those shims, or in between the motor and the pedestal in any way, that dirt will compress over time, and it will cause the motor to become loose, and then you'll have a lot of vibration based off that, and that vibration could cause problems with causing the alignment to go bad or something like that. So take time, make sure you get that base perfectly cleaned up. Next, I went ahead and reinstalled the motor, and as you can see, the bolts just went in by hand perfectly. So Once I got the motor on, I went ahead and just installed that coupler back on there. Now, we don't do a lot with grease or anti-seize when we put this on, and it really depends on what kind of company you work for. If it's in a very corrosive area, you might want to make sure that you put some anti-seize or something like that that's really going to make sure that those couplers never rust to the shaft. But in here we just do bare metal, and it works out for us because we remove it so many times. But definitely, you're welcome to put some grease on there or something like that. But when you get out to the field, you want to check with what your work is doing. Now, we went ahead and we tightened everything on. We left the rubber coupler in the middle out because it's not necessary for doing a dial indicator alignment. After I get these set screws locked down, we're going to come over and just take the dial indicator one last time, and we're going to check for run out on the coupler this time. I believe we just allow for about 1 to 2 thousandths here. If you have one that's way out, you really need to look at it, and also depending on the type of coupler you buy, you could definitely change that. So after you do that and decide that all the parts are good, that pretty much concludes cleaning and inspecting for us.